Hi there! My name is Sunny and today is October 8th, 2017. We've got a few weeks of prep left. How did last week go? So last week did not go so well for me in prep. NaNoWriMo prep it kept going lower and lower on the priority list. I had a lot of studying to do for tests and evaluations this past week. And then of course I was trying to catch up with my Stitchery Witchery project, so NaNoWriMo came after that and I really didn't get very much done. Which is okay. The reason why I felt it was okay to do that is that we still have a few weeks left and I know I can get plenty of stuff done in that time. So I'm not feeling too badly about that. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about how I prep and how I kind of envisioned this season of prep to go. I mentioned a little bit of it last video, but today I wanted to go in a little bit more detail and what I have planned for this year's NaNoWriMo and all of that stuff. So a little brief history with me and prepping for NaNoWriMo. My first NaNoWriMo was 2013 and I realized that it was going to happen like maybe a day or two in advance. I had always wanted to participate in NaNoWriMo and I kept hearing about it or being reminded about it like months out of season from Nano, and I kept always forgetting that it was a thing. And so like a few days before Halloween I realized it was going to happen and I freaked out. And I really didn't have all that much time to prep for it. And I didn't really realize that it was a thing that you could do. So at the most what I did was figure out what I wanted to write. I had been working on a different story at the time and I realized that if this experiment of NaNoWriMo didn't work, I didn't want the failure of that to be associated with a story that I was already like deeply connected to. So I just chose an inspiration that I had written down. It was like a paragraph or something like that, and I expanded on that and decided where I wanted to start, and I just dove in. And I don't normally write from the seat of my pants, but for some reason it worked, at least initially, and then about a third of the way in I realized that I needed to do something about like planning ahead. Everything started getting jumbled. I knew how I wanted the story to unfold, but it was really confused here. So I actually prepped midway through that NaNoWriMo and it turned out great. I got the 50,000 words. I actually made it to the midpoint of that story and I didn't really work on it throughout the year. 2014, I remembered that NaNoWriMo was a thing, of course, because I'd had such a blast the previous year, and I started prepping like a madman, like September, I think. I tried to hold myself off a little bit, but definitely I did a lot more prep for season 2 for my second season of NaNoWriMo, and that was quite a bit. I decided to work on the same story, so I kept writing on Heart-Wrencher for that one, and so I plotted from the midpoint to the end. And I didn't really have a firm grasp on the end, which is why I didn't actually get an ending on the story. Even after another 50,000 words on the story, I started trying to work on it and I got a really good plotted ending that I liked. When I started to write it, it just didn't feel like it was right, and I got stuck and I've still never really finished it. It's something that I'm going to revisit because I really like that story and I think it's worth polishing and bringing it out to the world. But my third NaNoWriMo that I participated in was 2015, and I prepped, if I thought the previous year I'd prepped like a madman, it was insane for that year. I was so excited and motivated and just ready. I also had a full-time job. And I worked at a bookstore and like I was just surrounded by books and I was really excited about writing, and I tried to get my store to come on board with like promoting NaNoWriMo and having like a table of books for writers and encouraging people to come into the cafe to write and all of this stuff, and none of that worked out. I made this whole detailed proposal and they just were not on board with it, and it put a little damper on NaNoWriMo for me that season. Plus I was stressed about not doing well with the job, and needless to say I made it about 20,000 words and I just lost steam. The story felt funky and I couldn't figure out how to get past this one point, and I didn't continue with it, and that was the first year for NaNoWriMo I didn't win. It was a little sad, and I'm still sad that I can't figure out how to get that story to work. I really loved the story that I was working on that year, but I just couldn't get it to work. So last year's NaNoWriMo, that's my 4th year participating, I knew that I couldn't spend all of September and October prepping because I would burn out again for NaNoWriMo when it actually mattered. So I pulled myself back and I only allowed myself to prep for October. And it actually worked. I had a whole new story that I was working on last year, and I came up with the plot throughout October. I didn't go overboard, I didn't get burnt out. So what is it that I like to do for prepping? I like to plot out my novel, and I like to read a book about the writing craft and apply it during the actual writing season. Those are the 2 main things that I like to do. This year I'm reading Characters in Viewpoint by Orson Scott Card. It's another one in the Elements of Fiction Writing series by Writer's Digest, and I really like these books. The first one that I read was Conflict and Suspense. I meant to read this one last year for my plotting and stuff, but I didn't get it in time. They didn't have it at the store. Beginning, Middles, and Ends, this one I found pretty helpful as well. And now I'm reading Characters in Viewpoint. So I decided to focus on character development and characters this year because the story that I wanted to work on is full of a cast of colorful characters. It's a sci-fi space adventure kind of suspense thing. It's a story that I mentioned last year in my prep season when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to write for that year, and I decided now is the year to do it. I'm super motivated to do it. Unfortunately, I feel like I've not read enough space adventure spaceship kind of books. Some of the other sci-fi things that I love are definitely like the newer Star Trek movies and Star Wars, of course. Battlestar Galactica and Firefly, like any of these spaceship sci-fi things, I am all about. And it's really kind of surprising to me that I've never wanted to write anything in space yet. So this will be the first time I'm actually delving into that, and that makes me nervous because I'm so comfortable with magic and fantasy, not so comfortable with futuristic, modern, and sci-fi and space. I don't know, you know, it may be fine, it may be something that I just won't be comfortable writing because I'm just not as well read and not as well engrossed in that world at this point. But this has a wide cast of characters, which is why I think that being character focused this year might be kind of interesting. I still have to develop certain characters. I have a good sense of the main character, but depending upon what I'm reading in this, I may actually need to change his character, or I may need to think about it in a different way. So the very limited amount of prep that I've done so far is I've read a few pages into the Character and Viewpoint book. Here's a quote from the introduction. "We who write fiction have no team of actors or musicians to do our bidding, so it's easy to forget that our work too has a composition stage and a performance stage. We are both composer and performer, or rather, we are both storyteller and writer." He wants you to be thinking about when you're planning your story, you're coming up with your characters and developing these things, that this is the composition stage. This is very much a singular experience. And then when you write the final words of the story, the words that are going to show up on the page that the reader reads, that's the performance stage. And I don't know, I just thought that quote was a really interesting way to think about planning. And I thought that it was really poignant for today. Next week I want to talk about the pitfalls of prepping, because I know that there's a lot of people who don't do it or are hesitant to like get into the weeds of prep. And that brings me to you. Are you prepping? Have you fallen a little behind like I have a little bit? How do you prep? Do you find it's useful to just go full bore into plotting? Are you more of like just an overarching sense of the story? Are you just kind of thinking about it rather than writing anything down or doing anything like concrete? How do you prep? I think it's an interesting question. Mine always has to do with trying to grow my writing skill, and this year it's characters. Last year it was beginnings, middles, and ends, and the year before that I think it was like conflict and suspense or something. I don't know. I'm trying to continually improve, and I think NaNoWriMo is a good time to try to do that, but other people have other things. Maybe your prep is to actually sit down and absorb a lot of content, maybe read a bunch of books and try to get inspiration from other people's writing, or watching a bunch of movies and trying to get inspiration from that. So let me know in the comments below how you're prepping, if you're prepping, and I will check in with you next week. And we can start talking about some of the rituals of prepping, or maybe some pitfalls and stuff like that. I'll see you next week. I'm really excited about it. Hang in there. I'll see you. This year, why can't I talk today? This year the book that I'm